Hello everyone and welcome to the StarScript Observatory. Today we are featuring muralist and 3D art creator John Park. John, welcome.
Hello everyone.
So we're going to interview John today and ask him a few questions about his artwork, how he got started, what his challenges are, what his vision is moving forward, and we're going to talk a little bit about the StarScript Legends story production platform. So, first question, John, what got you on the path to wanting to create art as a profession?
I was always an artist growing up. I think as most people who are in this profession probably attest to, that they were all probably the best artists in their school growing up. So it was always a passion of mine. And then when I moved out here, I got a pretty cushy job at a private school as an art teacher. And so I did that for about 13 years. And what that actually allowed me to do is it allowed me to develop my artistic style independent of the need to feed myself off of it. And so it just allowed me to develop it in a more slow and deliberate way because I wasn't dependent on it for subsistence. And then in 2012, the school actually shut down due to massive corruption, and then I just decided to go full-time.
Okay, and did your parents support you in wanting to just become a professional artist and make your living that way?
Not at first. I think that they were always very supportive of my art. Initially, especially when I was in high school, their big pitch to me was, well, if you become a dentist, then you can do art like 3-4 days out of the week, which obviously that wasn't a very compelling storyline for me, so I definitely resisted that. But when it did come time for me to go to art school, they were very supportive.
That's funny because, yeah, my parents, and I think it's just common, but my parents, same thing. Doctor or lawyer first, then do what you want after that.
Exactly. It's like become a respectable person who makes a lot of money and then pursue hobbies.
Right.
Which I guess that's like our parents' generation's version of like a perfect life. Do you know what I mean?
It's like an American dream, like an old maybe version of the American dream.
Yeah, well, I find it interesting too that their dream life doesn't involve doing work that they find fulfilling and passionate. It's like you make the money and then you find your fulfillment somewhere else.
Yeah, I think it was Jim Carrey, wasn't it? It's like a kind of a famous YouTube video of Jim Carrey's speech at a graduation thing or something, him saying that, like, I think it was him, and it could have been somebody else, but he said something like, if you whatever you dream of, you're going to have a chance of failure, but if you want to take that safe path to be doctor or lawyer or whatever, you're going to have a risk of failure for that too.
Yeah.
And so it just depends on what you want to put your time into. And I think I faced that same thing. I went for a biology degree in school, quickly found out that I wanted to be a writer, and that was the thing I wanted to do. And obviously it turned out to be much, much more, but definitely had the just this kind of feeling of like do some other regular job first that seemed very like unsatisfying, like spiritually in like a lot of different ways, and then do your passion as like something on the side after all said and done. So after you're done like eating and showering and working and getting like taking care of all your stuff, then do the thing that you're most passionate about. And so it's kind of a juggling game. I think it's like a balance in order to get to that point to where you can actually support yourself as an independent artist.
Well, I mean, I think that that's one of the trickiest parts about giving out any sort of advice is that it seems like everyone's path to, if you're lucky enough to have a life where your work is what you're also passionate about, everyone's journey to that point is so different, and there are so many random variables that are completely outside of any control that this is one of the reasons why they don't teach this shit in art school, because there's no one path. There's no one path to becoming. I never took a class called How to Become a Professional Artist.
Right.
I had a professional practices class for illustration, but that's very different. That's like send a thank you letter after this. Your resume has to look like this. Your business cards have to look like that. It wasn't like here's the path to making it as an artist, because that path is so twisty and turny and windy and so different for everyone that there is no one size fits all solution. You know, you can sort of go into generalities, like make sure that you're passionate about this thing because it's going to take a lot of work to get good at it. So you better be really, you better like the work that's involved, because otherwise you probably aren't going to put in the hours that it takes to gain any sort of expertise. You know, like that kind of stuff is easy because it's like that does apply to everyone. But then in terms of the specifics, I mean, man, it's like work really hard, pray for good luck, and you know that old quote, inspiration exists, but it must find you working.
Okay.
It's pretty much, you know, the basic principle to it.
And what do you agree that as an independent artist, you basically have to be an entrepreneur to be successful?
Yeah. I mean, you can do the art and then struggle with money and beat your head against the wall for the rest of your life. And you could be one of those guys. I feel like you're going to end up drinking a lot of whiskey because of that. So it's not necessarily the most sustainable path. So yeah, if you want to keep your sanity and still, you know, do what you love, you got to figure out how to be an entrepreneur as well.
And when was it, like at what point in time was it as a teacher, or when did you realize, because I remember for me, wanting to be an independent writer, when I realized I'm going to have to like know business to do this, and that means I have to know all of these different skill sets that people spend their entire lives working on. I got to know a little bit about all of that in order to make a successful business. When did you have that kind of like realization?
You know, honestly, that's something I struggle with on a daily basis. It's it's one of these things where I still know what's necessary, and yet the sort of, you know, crazy artist part of me is always, because given the choice, I'm always gonna push my energy into the newest piece, the latest work, over you know, updating my email lists, or, you know, keeping up with my social media. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, having my fiancée Julie come on board this year and join the team full time has just been such a boon, because it really does allow me to kind of focus my energy into what I prefer, which is the work.
Cool. Yeah, let's get into that type of work that you're currently doing. But actually, before that, let's talk about, you know, where did you start? Did you start sketching? Like, what different mediums of art did you use, and how did you get to the point to where you're now focusing on basically being a muralist and a 3D art creator?
Yeah, so drawing, I think, is almost every artist's first passion, because I think it's the thing that you're handed first as a child. It's the most accessible, the materials, there's no real barrier to entry. All you need is a blank piece of paper and a pencil, and you can start to create. So I think that most visual artists master that vocabulary first, and that certainly was my case as well. I spent most of my childhood just drawing anything I could get my hands on. You know, when I was a kid, it was copying dinosaur books, and then it was, you know, copying my favorite like giant robot characters, Voltron and whatnot. And then in high school, it became comic books, you know, Batman and X-Men, and again, whatever was at hand. A lot of Punisher as well. And then when I got to art school, I was really fortunate in that I actually had a plan of action coming into art school, when I feel like a lot of my peers didn't. They sort of left it up to the school to sort of direct their focus and energy. I knew for myself, so when I was in probably 8th grade, I got really obsessed with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, and, you know, they made such a big deal about the concentrated anatomical studies that they both engaged in, you know, and for them at the time that was a very risky move, because you could be excommunicated from the church, you could be put in prison for cutting open a human body. It was considered heresy. And so they had to bribe, you know, morgue attendants, and they had to do it all in secret, and, you know, they're dissecting bodies in the, you know, 15th century when there was no embalming techniques. So these are all fresh, ripe corpses that they're cutting into. But I became really fascinated by that. So when I got to art school, I decided that I was going to marshal whatever resources the school had to recreate for myself a classical education. And so I was able to take extensive anatomy classes, and I actually got an opportunity to first take as a student, and then I became the TA for an advanced anatomy class where we actually used corpses from the Brown medical facilities.
Wow.
And so I did some cadaver dissection, and then my senior year I was able to spend the entire year in Rome, which was just a dream come true, because I'd been concentrating on studying Renaissance art for so long that seeing it in person was it was just the best way to complete my education, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then what kind of, so that's where I guess there's a lot of human figures in your work, but what now moved you into becoming a muralist?
Yeah, that was everything sort of came into focus when I moved to LA, because as soon as I saw, I can still remember the first time a buddy of mine handed me the first issue of Juxtapose magazine that I ever saw.
Okay.
And just flipping through it, I was just shocked. I was amazed, because up until that point, I had a very prejudicial understanding of what modern art was. To me, modern art represented the worst charlatans that exist in the art world. These are high concept, low execution pieces that elicit the thought in almost everyone who sees it, I could have done that. I could do that in my garage in 5 minutes. So that was my view of what modern art was. And then to see in the pages of Juxtapose what modern art actually could become, and what it was becoming under my nose, which is this amazing mixture of every kind of influence that you can think of, from tattoo art to hot rod art to anime, to movie references and comic book references, and then you're taking all of that, but you're also blending it with true illustration level skill in terms of lighting and volume and anatomy and composition and color theory. And for me it was a revelation, because I realized that I had found the art movement that I was always looking for, and I immediately wanted to get involved.
Okay, and did you find, I think I remember you doing paintings a lot, and then I guess now like everything's more focused on doing murals. What sparked that switch to go from painting to mural?
So I think that's one of those instances where like all you can really do is sort of follow your passion, and you can't really control a whole lot of outside factors. So for me, painting was a natural thing to pour my energy into. And then in 2012, Los Angeles rewrote its mural ordinance, and they made it much, much easier for artists to start putting up legal public work again. They essentially took away all the barriers to entry and registration fees, and just essentially said all you need is the landlord's permission, and you have to make sure that the mural itself doesn't have any sort of elements of advertising on it. So no logos, no brand names, anything like that. And as long as you fulfill those two requirements, you can put up legal pieces. And as soon as that happened, there was a huge boom in the demand for murals in LA. And luckily by that point I was already painting some murals for a couple of nonprofit organizations. One was called the Do Art Foundation, and then one was called Beautify Earth. And so through them I started to get my initial walls, and then just through word of mouth and making sure, my only mission was to make sure that every piece that I did was better than the last one that I did. And that's the principle that I follow to this day. And luckily through that and through word of mouth, I've been getting almost all my work that way.
Okay. And there's one of your pieces is like a mile away, just going north on
Lincoln.
On Lincoln, you have that one that's like I really like the colors in it with the what is there's like birds on it or something.
Yeah,
right?
it's like a cranes.
Cranes for like a sushi place or something, or
I think it's called Bowl Kitchen.
okay,
But
okay.
the piece itself is inspired by this card game called Watu, which I think it might originally have been Japanese, but Koreans play it a lot. So I used to play this card game with my family when I was a kid. And the cards themselves have a very, very cool, very specific aesthetic. They're red back cards with really bold black and white images that have little touches of color. And then the little touches of color differentiate the cards. So you'll have like 4 cards that are a moon, setting over a hillside. And then the sort of the trump card within that set has like a little flower that's like blue. And so the cards all look the same except for one that has this little splash of color. So when I got that job, the owner, who's Korean, she asked me to do something that referenced Korean culture, and the building was black already, and I immediately thought about those cards. And it only took about a day to do the whole design. It kind of created itself, and it ended up being a really nice little successful quick piece.
Okay, cool. And just so anybody who's listening can hear and wants to see some of your art in person, where can people find current pieces? If you can give kind of a list of locations and the name of the art piece and maybe a little description of what it looks like.
Okay, let's see. So in Santa Monica, I have that one that's on Lincoln. I have another mural that's inside a restaurant on Broadway called The Independence. It's right on 2nd and Broadway.
What's the restaurant name?
It's called The Independence.
Oh, it's called The Independence.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And the mural is called Eat, Drink, and Be Merry. I have another piece down in Playa del Rey on it's 323 Culver Boulevard, and it's attached to a surf shop that a friend of mine owns called Clean Aesthetic. I have a big piece in El Segundo on Main and Pine. I just did a really large piece in Tustin. It's at this complex called The Legacy at Tustin Flight. Anyway, and then I just did another large-scale piece in San Diego as well at this place called the Ampersand Building, which is the location of the old Union Tribune newspaper.
And that's Historia Futura?
Yep. That's
Futuro.
Yep.
Okay,
Historia Futuro.
Historia Futuro, okay. And just for people who are listening, maybe just getting started or struggling with making money, could you describe when did you start actually making money with art, and then how did that evolve over time?
So that for me was a very gradual process, because I started showing my work in 2008, and so I had a 4-year period of sort of a buffer zone when I was still teaching full-time, and then also beginning to show my work. And so at first it was only a couple thousand a year that I was making in art, and as it turns out, as I put more and more time into it, I just started to do more gallery shows and started getting more private commissions as well. And so by the time 2012 rolled around, I had sort of slowly built up a financial base that sort of involved a lot of different things. Like I said, again, gallery work, which is very hard to make money showing at a gallery because they take 50%. It's one of the reasons why the gallery system's collapsing right now. Social media has taken away the gatekeeper role of galleries, and it's also taken away their advantage of them being the only people to be able to contact collectors, because now any artist with an Instagram page can contact thousands of people. But yeah, the gallery work was bringing in some money, private commissions were bringing in some money, and then I also, because of my illustration background, I was able to do some freelance work in movies as well, so doing storyboards and character design, things like that, production design. That wasn't a big piece of it, but it certainly helped. So I think the main thing too is that even within any sort of passion, there are so many different avenues for following that passion. There's so many different avenues for creativity within any field that you can really start to plant a lot of seeds, and that's absolutely how I see it, because I would sometimes do a piece of work and nothing would come of it, and then 4 or 5 years down the line somebody would contact me about it, and a new job would spring up because of something I had done that I completely forgotten about. And so in a lot of ways you're planting seeds constantly, whether you're consciously doing it or unconsciously doing it.
And some things I say to people as a startup consultant, because I feel like it was the same for me. I get people who contact me and will say, I met you years ago, or maybe they even know somebody who met me years ago, and then they went to my website, studied some of the stuff I did, and then years went by, and they always knew they were going to contact me, and all of a sudden one day they contact me, and now they're like one of my biggest clients. So it's kind of weird that every day when you go out and you network at one event or the other, I think there's just some simple requisites. Communicate what you're passionate about. Make sure, or not necessarily make sure, but be open to communicating, hey, I am someone who does this as a service for others. And that often will get people saying, well, geez, I know someone who needs this, or I need this, or something like that. And even if they don't, they meet someone 6 months later who needs it, and then they're like, oh, this guy. And so it's amazing where all that could come from. So I guess, would you say that probably best advice to people starting out is just network, go out to events all over the place, wherever you're at. We're talking just because a lot of your referrals come from actually physically meeting people, or basically people observing your art somewhere in the physical world, not necessarily in the digital world, and then reaching out to you.
And also, because I don't necessarily do a lot of what would be considered traditional networking, but I tend to use my work opportunities as my primary form of networking. So for me, the general rules that I follow is get there early, be the last one to leave, and work harder than everyone else around you. And be easy to work with. Be as nice as you can, be as agreeable as you can. Don't be a pushover, don't let people walk all over you, but don't be an asshole either. And because again, you never know what's going to come of these things, and you never know when they're going to happen. And like I said before, whether you are consciously doing it or unconsciously doing it, you're planting seeds. So if you're constantly late, you're planting that seed in people's minds, and you are eventually going to get a reputation for always being late. If you're hard to work with, you're planting that seed, whether you know it or not. That's going to grow into something, and whether you have some control over whether you want to reap these crops that you sow. But either way, you're always planting seeds. So I look at it that way.
Okay. Shifting on to the how you do create a mural. Is there some type of technique that's maybe universal, maybe all muralists do it, or maybe that you've adopted that you're willing to share that helps with scaling, or how do you go about setting up a project?
I think obviously the sort of fundamental aspects of art are the most important to first study. So learning proportion, learning composition and color theory, and learning how to draw is probably the most important skill that any visual artist can acquire. So you should be able to look at something and then translate that onto a piece of paper the way it looks, so that someone else who isn't an artist can come up, look at it, and go, oh, that's a microphone, that's an Air Jordan, that's a whatever specific item. That's one of the most important skills. Now, in terms of scaling up, you got to learn how to paint and draw digitally. It's absolutely essential. I just had my first two large scale, 5,000 or above square foot projects in the last year. And I would not have been able to do either one of those projects if I hadn't been working digitally, because of the number of changes that were required by the client and the turnaround time that was expected of me. There's no way I could have done any of those things traditionally. There's absolutely no way. I was sometimes having to turn around paintings in 2 days. It's a painting that would have taken me a week and a half if I'd been doing it traditionally.
So how then how's the digital element involved? Like, what's the process?
So I sort of have a hybrid process. So I do all of my sketching on paper, and then when I lock onto a really good concept, then I do basically almost like a fully rendered drawing, black and white drawing, where I'm trying to lock down all the forms and all the shading. And once that's done, I take a picture of that, stick it to Procreate, and then start adding colors, start adding backgrounds. And once it's in Procreate, then the opportunities that you have to change the design, the flexibility that program gives you it's really incredible. I don't know if you've ever used it. It's kind of like the next gen Photoshop for touchscreen.
Okay, what's it called again?
Procreate.
Procreate. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have it on my iPad Pro.
Okay.
I'm sure it's on other platforms. I'm sure you could get it on other tablets, but it really is just it blows me away how good that program is, how smoothly it runs, and just how powerful it is. It's made a huge difference in my work.
Okay, awesome. And then, so what would you say out of all the challenges of being an independent artist? What's the number one challenge that you have faced or still face that overcoming it is just it's the biggest feat?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I guess you could break that up into good challenges and bad challenges, or that's how I sort of classify them in my mind. So, like, for instance, a good challenge is the last project that I did, where it was 2 7-story elevator towers that represented almost 10,000 square feet of mural work. I had a team of 3 that I had to kind of keep everyone working, figuring out the logistics, making sure that we weren't running over stuff on the construction site with these giant 80-foot boom lifts. Those are great challenges, and they're also very, very difficult. They're incredibly taxing. They require every ounce of attention and focus that you have. But those are the kind of challenges that I live for.
Sure.
And then there are the bad challenges, which I'm sure most of the artists out there can relate with me about that, which is like balancing my checkbook, making sure I'm paying my taxes, like ignoring my social media, which I know I shouldn't, like not getting a mailing list together, like not updating my website. Those are the daily struggle, the attrition level challenges that, they can grind you down. And if you don't stay in front of it, then small pebbles make a mountain. So it's just one of those things that you gotta sort of find the discipline to start addressing. Which again, I work on a daily basis.
Okay, yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate. One of the ways I like to describe business, to have a business work well, it's kind of like the human body. You need all of these organs that work in harmony with one another in order to function appropriately. And the product or service, it is, even though it is the main focus, kind of like the musician is, or the writer is, there's still so much that needs to be done in order for that product to reach its to basically be offered and served to everybody, as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And so just learning marketing, which is just such a giant thing, learning some basic contracting, learning the finance element, and also just web design, social media, lead capture, like you're saying with the email list. All these things can be quite overwhelming for an independent artist, and that kind of I think gives us a pathway to kind of start talking a little bit about the StarScript Legends platform. And one of our main goals is, the first is we identified all these common challenges that artists face, and you've identified them yourself pretty much, but funding for sure, is one of the challenges. Governance, building a team, like you said, when Julie, your fiance, came on board, it's just this huge relief, because now the entire burden of running this business, kind of like your baby, it has to have all these things working in harmony. That now you now, because you're building a team, it really helps out to kind of like share that burden.
Yeah, that's been a tremendous help, because again, it was one of these things where there were business aspects that I just kind of neglected. And I was of the mind that I'm just going to keep neglecting it and keep doing what I'm passionate about, and that's great for maintaining my sanity, but it's not necessarily the best move for growing a small business. So I think, if you can find a good team, if you can find people that you trust, delegate. Start finding ways that they can actually, come into your life and add all this value, because you have a finite amount of energy. Nobody has unlimited amounts of energy. So every time you have to put your mind towards something difficult, it takes away from something else you could be doing too. So it's all about sort of the intelligent allocation of scarce resources.
Okay. And then how do you think, and I'm asking this basically for feedback on when we're working on developing the Legends platform, but also, that'd basically be mainly it. And also but I just want to know also what would help you. How do you think technology could help you with those, fill in those missing pieces to kind of support you in a way that's going to enable you to focus on, what you want to focus on most, and what do you think? Like, what type of technology do you think would help you with that?
I think that we're sort of stumbling towards it already. I think that the connectivity that social media allows for people that's the key. Because what you're going to end up doing eventually is you're going to end up being able to connect with other people who have their passions in different places, but where your interests overlap. And then you'll be able to find people who are very passionate about, organizing budgets and spreadsheets, and but also being involved in a creative endeavor. And so you'll be able to link up various artists of different skill sets and different trades with people who are more managerial and administrative in their functions, and what results is going to be greater than the sum of its parts. I find that when you have a team functioning really well, I noticed that on this last mural job, where when I had my the team of 4 and we were all in the zone and painting, we were getting way more done every day than 4 people could get done. So it's kind of uncanny in that way, because you can kind of like build off each other's energy, and so you end up creating something that's greater than even the sum of its parts. And I think that's something that a platform like StarScript Legends is going to be really good for, because the idea is to connect people whose interests overlap but who have different skill sets that they can bring to bear, and then they can end up creating something that is just way beyond what each individual person could have ever come up with.
Yeah, and so when you have some big project like this one, and this is you after years and years of becoming established, and how much the project's going to pay, it's pretty easy for you to budget, find a team. But a lot of independent creators, it could be artists, musician, or writers, really struggle with team building, probably because in the beginning, what can they possibly have to give to someone help them manage the business? That's why I think, like you were saying, to match people up, if there was a system, and which is where Legends comes into play, where people can look for people and make some type of offer to say, look, this project I'm aiming to make it produce income, and here's how it's going to be published on the platform. Obviously this is not a mural, but it's some type of digital collaboration, and I can give you a piece of that, and we can do it through a smart contract, so now there's no worry about not being paid, as long as that person contributes the creative work to the project, and that project basically accepts it, the governors of that project accept it, they can get automatically compensated. And that brings us to kind of like another thing that I think a lot of artists struggle with is contracting and not being paid. Have you ever not been paid for a job that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially early on, when I wasn't smart about kind of protecting my interests. I think that too many artists. So again, this is one of these things that they do not teach in art school because it's impossible, which is, how do you price yourself? What value do you give to yourself? And that again, every artist's path to figuring out what their market price is different. And some people figure it out right away, and other people it takes them years and years and years, and they struggle. But I think that in general, most artists, when they start out, undervalue themselves.
Okay.
They think to themselves, well, it doesn't really take me that long to make this. And what they think about is the execution time, and what they don't think about is the number of years it took for them to get to the point where they could execute said piece in that short amount of time. That being said, it's also very, very important that you don't be too reckless with your market value either, because especially if you want to do something like fine art and you're entering into the gallery world, one of the things about pricing work is that you can't go the other way. You can only escalate your price. You can't lower it. You can't try to sell a painting for $3,000 and when no one takes it, go, okay, I changed my mind. How about 2,000? It unfortunately doesn't work that way, because the way that art is valued, it's kind of like fiat currency. It has no real intrinsic value of its own to speak of. There's no objective measure that says this painting is worth this much. So the value is based upon agreement.
Right.
And so whatever the market and the people around you agree to that price as being, then that's the price. And if you try to escalate your price too quickly, then it essentially makes your work worthless, because when you're trying to sell something at a much higher price than everyone else agrees upon, it's very difficult to then take your own personal valuation back and try to backtrack. It's tricky though, because art is also what's called a Veblen good, so it's like one of these few items that defy market logic, where sometimes the more expensive it is, the more desirable it becomes. Whereas usually with market forces, it's like the cheaper you make it, the more people want to buy it.
Yeah.
But then with certain things like watches and paintings and cars, it's like if it's super expensive, then like everyone wants it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that when you do tend to undervalue yourself, or you do something for cheap, sometimes people aren't as attracted to it just because it's cheaper.
Exactly.
And it's kind of a weird thing. You would think that, it's cheaper for the same thing, but it's like, it's really the way you hold yourself. It's part of branding, of course, also as well. And I guess like we look at that case of like Mr. Brainwash, where he's like selling, selling stuff for $30,000 pieces. It really is conceptual at the end of the day. So I wanted to bring up the list of features that we're planning on releasing for the Legends platform. And basically I want you to choose which one that you're looking forward to most and why. And for anyone listening right now, you could just go to the StarScriptLegends.com homepage, and you'll see a list of features. If you just scroll down a couple sections, you'll see a list of features there. So I'm just going to briefly go through each of the features. And then just hear your opinion on which one you're looking forward to most. So the first one is story origination, basically the ability to create, to originate and publish any form of digital work, and it could be mixed media, but the end result is something that is digital and collaborative. Number two is crowdfunded productions, but a new type of crowdfunding where multiple contributors can get paid automatically from the same project on a recurring basis, enabling creators to work on many different projects at the same time or over time, and start receiving residual income from all of them. A third is the ability to team build, to go and search, hey, I need to find this type of artist. I need someone to do some 3D cardboard art, which we'll end up closing on because that's something else that you do. And to find that person in the search and be able to recruit them and to basically find the right people to work with you and to be able to give them something of value, to have a system that's set up where you can actually give something of value that is automated. The fourth one is just kind of the governance element, the ability to govern your team online, to choose, as we say, who controls what, who sees what, who votes on what, and it could be like a dictatorship or it could be democratic. So the ability to just govern a digital product through a voting protocol on an application. The fifth one is world building tools. So, for instance, if you're building any type of digital production that has a story to it, where there is a timeline and you need to communicate that timeline, and maybe even each character has its own timeline, and maybe there's even like you have a time element in your story, and so different characters' time, especially when we get in like Marvel or DC, like there's a bunch of, issues where they start really getting deep into traveling back in time and forward in time and how that changes things. Also, world building tools could be a storyboard builder. And this again is an interactive form of world building tools where you can propose things to a group of people based on certain governance settings. People can vote on it, and then work can get approved or denied. Let's see where we at here. The sixth one is a production timeline, which is basically an ability to create one creative work, put one creative work in production, have a timeline set, and maybe you'll have other creative works for a digital production that are also being done earlier and later in time. Being able to keep track of that, maybe even being able to let fans see what's being produced, when things are expected to come out, and being able to keep track of also when things are due, so you can kind of form a rhythm. Then we have the creator-patron connection, so just the ability to connect with fans on a more in-depth level. This could be through voting, it could be through like polls and giving feedback, it could be through patrons being able to make money off of showcasing the work of stories and creators on their own page to receive some form of also some affiliate type residual income. And the last would be the creating immersive storytelling experiences. And this is basically any form of digital media, whichever way you could mix and match it together. You could have a novel that it's pretty much a novel for a lot of the time, and then you go every once in a while, you flip the page and there's a short video that plays that continues the story. It could also be an augmented reality experience, a virtual reality experience, a short game, basically enabling to expand using all these forms of mixed media to kind of and give a venue for these types of stories to be experienced by fans. So out of all of those features that you hear, which one are you most excited about?
I mean, obviously the aspect of crowdfunding and being able to begin allowing creators to make passive income on things that they've already created, that's really great for fulfilling those extrinsic sort of goals of building business and building wealth and whatnot. But I think that there's so many opportunities to tap into the sort of deep intrinsic motivators that really, that's what sort of makes up a passion. That's what defines a passion, right? So like the three main intrinsic motivators are the ability to master something, autonomy, and a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging to something that's greater than you are. And I think that you're tapping into all three of those here. And what you're doing is you're democratizing production, which has almost always been a very, very hierarchical, top-down system that you usually have to be involved with some kind of large studio that has a large pool of money before anything can really start to happen. And you don't have any autonomy there, and you may not even really feel great about belonging to what you're trying to do. Whereas with this, you're taking the production tools and you're putting it into the hands of the actual creative people, and really just again like making a more egalitarian system, a more transparent system. The more control that people have over these things, the processes, the happier they're going to be. And ultimately, as much as I want to be successful and as much as I want to build my business and my artwork and whatnot, I want to be happy. That's first and foremost. That's why I do anything. Is I'm seeking to enjoy my life and to enjoy the people in my life. And if there's something in my life that isn't contributing to that, why have it? What's the point ultimately? Right. Like that's the only real point is to try and build a happy life and to build a happy world around yourself. And I think that the tools that you're giving people that are going to be available to them on the Legends platform it's one of those amazing times when the intrinsic and the extrinsic factors overlap very nicely. It's a nice big Venn diagram where, you know, both those things. And I mean, isn't that really the goal? Is when you can work towards a passion, by definition, your intrinsic and extrinsic motivators are overlapping. That's all it is. So I'm very excited for all these aspects, man. Really.
Great. Awesome. Okay, so I just got a couple more questions for you, and then we're going to go ahead and end the interview. First one is there any current projects that you're working on right now or scheduled to work on in the near future that you wanted to share?
I have one thing. I don't know if I can really share it just yet. We'll hopefully be getting a final word on it in the next couple of weeks, but it's a 3D thing.
Okay.
And it's for a government entity, so if we get it, then hopefully we'll be able to promote it.
Okay, cool. So government needs some 3D objects. Okay. Okay, and then let's see. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the 3D cardboard art that you do. Just tell me a little bit how you got started with experimenting with that. It's kind of a very unique medium, and especially just maybe talk a little bit about what we were talking about the other day about how the cardboard can serve as like a mold that you can replace with another substance and make actually pretty much anything out of cardboard, any 3D objects. Will you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is definitely one of those examples of where ultimately you just have to follow the things that you're passionate about, the things that spark your interest and spark your curiosity. 3D work, doing sculptures and thinking in 3 dimensions is something that's always come very naturally to me. I actually found it much harder to learn how to paint than to learn how to sculpt in 3 dimensions, because painting is all about illusion, and it's all about learning tricks and how to fool the eye into thinking there's volume. And so that took me a much longer time to get the hang of than actually sculpting someone's face out of clay. That was always very natural for me. And when I was in college, we had a number of projects that we had to do using cardboard, and that was my first introduction to cardboard as a production material, as opposed to just mass packaging, the cheapest material you can possibly find. You find it everywhere on Earth. There's always discarded cardboard no matter where you go, and so that was the first time that it really was presented to me as oh no, this is also an art material. And so that really stuck out in my head. So then in, I believe it was 2012, there was this event called Kane's Arcade, which is a viral video. You guys can look it up. But they were having the 2nd anniversary, and they invited a bunch of artists to make. I was actually asked to just do a painting on a piece of cardboard initially. But I had a little bit of time, and I remembered how much I loved doing my 3D cardboard projects in college. So I just decided to make a gorilla helmet instead. And pretty much as soon as I made it, and I realized that, oh wow, I can make all kinds of stuff like this, it just, it started a, unstoppable momentum inside of myself, where whenever I have any extra time, I work on this stuff. But the reason why I say it's important to kind of follow this as a passion is because, for the first 6 years that I was making this stuff, I couldn't sell any of it. There was no market for it. It took way too long for me to price it at any kind of reasonable level, and no one was willing to pay the prices I was charging. So it was literally something I did just because I fucking loved doing it, and there's no other extrinsic motivator for it. There were all kinds of factors saying, hey, maybe you're wasting your time, maybe you should work on stuff you can actually sell. But again, for me, it was an uncontrollable passion that I just find it so amazing. There's something different. There's, as much as I love painting, and as much as I love the results of painting, there's something different about being able to hold something in your hands and rotate it around and interact with it, even put it on and wear it. There's a different quality to it. It's present in the world in a way that a painting cannot be, because a painting is flat and it's literally the illusion of substance. Whereas a three-dimensional object is substance. And so, luckily now I'm finally finding some avenues where people are willing to give me money for this. It's certainly not a huge aspect of my overall income, but again, it's something that I'm probably going to do until I'm dead. So.
Okay, awesome. And for anybody who's interested in contacting you and wanting to get some of this 3D art created, or getting a mural done for their building or their home or their restaurant or their nonprofit, how can they go about getting a hold of you?
The best way would probably be either go to johnparkart.com, which is my website, currently being constructed, and or my Instagram, which is also johnparkart. That's probably the best way to see updated stuff.
Okay, awesome. Well, I feel like there's so much more for us to talk about with regards to the 3D art, and I wanted to get into the third eye thing. I wanted to talk about the backpack that you created for us for the Kalina costume for Comic-Con, but I think we'll just have to do it another time at another interview, which I'm excited to hopefully have you on again sometime in the future.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and all right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Please go ahead and if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to ring that bell if you're interested in being notified when new featured creators are featured on the StarScript Observatory. See you next time.